Good afternoon, everyone. And I know the previous session was about hyperconnectivity. It is a little bit of a strange situation where I'm actually dialing in today from a place which actually has low bandwidth. So apologies in advance if the slides take a little longer than normal to load. I'm actually going to be talking about how the consumer, the confidence and credit are actually driving e-commerce in India. So while the previous session in some sense talked about how the supply side factor of connectivity and to a certain extent capital is driving e-commerce, I'm looking at the other side, which is to look at from a perspective of what's happening from a consumer perspective. And I'm looking at it not only from a behavior perspective, but also from a perspective of how confidence and credit is impacting the same. If one was to report and list about India and consumption, you would hear about the fact that it is driven by youth. You would hear about the fact that it is supported by rapid urbanization and the fact that men continue to play a dominant role in the Indian economy. I actually have a slightly different point of view, different twist on the same. If you look at the left hand side of this page, you actually find. So as I was saying, if I look at the left hand side of this panel, you actually see that in the next few years, the growth in the population, in the income, is actually being driven by the left hand side of this page, which is around the older, the 35 plus, is actually growing much faster than the younger. So that's actually not true going forward in terms of the youth driving the growth. The second is urbanization. If you look at the last 100 years, the maximum level of urbanization in a decade has been about 3%. So it's not as big as it is sometimes touted to be. And on the right hand side, you see something phenomenal, which is actually in terms of percentage enrollment, women overtaking men. And that obviously has a consequence in terms of how consumption is going to go going forward. Now, you may ask in terms of saying this is from a perspective of consumption, but what does it have to do from a perspective of e-commerce? What does it have from a perspective of looking at internet? And really, if you look at it over a period of time, India's internet penetration is going to increase and expected to reach nearly 70% by 2025 and 80% by 2030. What is more interesting is the fact that if you look at it over a period of time, rural now contributes to nearly half of the internet users. Older people, 45 plus, actually are nearly as big as the millennials, and women are very close to now the halfway mark. What does India do online? It's actually social and video content. Search and transaction related activities are largely urban. Interestingly, what you find is even in small towns, women and older cohorts nearly have as many heavy, mid-heavy internet users as the 3M model, which is the metro male millennial cohorts that I talk about. And really, if you look at the moderate internet users, these are the ones who have started using internet for shopping, in addition to just access WhatsApp and YouTube, which is essentially what the light internet users end up doing. Now, today we are talking about what's happening on the commerce side and how this is going to drive forward. If you look at it, really, if I double dive on what's happened because of COVID, and you will find that really pre-COVID and just taking 2017 as an example, if you look at 2017, you found that the 35 to plus cohort accounted for 40%. Today, it is more than 50%. Women are close to 50%, and middle income households have become as important as the affluent households in terms of commerce. So this is not in terms of internet, but this is actually in terms of commerce itself. Now, if there is one slide that you recall and take away from this presentation, it is this. Our estimates suggest that the digitally influenced retail spend is going to surpass $1.5 trillion by 2030, right? And this is influence, which means people have researched, people have actually looked at it before doing the purchase. If you look at online retail, we expect this to grow nearly tenfold, touching $300 billion in the time period that we are talking about. So really, it's going to be a massive increase. And in some sense, one could even say that today, the 19th, 20th, and 21st century shopping coexists in India with general trade, traditional modern retail, and online retail. We actually looked at where this growth has happened. So if one looks at source of growth compared to pre-COVID to now, actually, interestingly, a lot of growth has really happened by new shopper growth rather than old shoppers buying more, either in terms of breadth or depth. So really, a lot of growth in terms of e-commerce has been driven by new shoppers rather than old shoppers buying more. And the other part which is interesting is to look at where the source of growth is going to come from. Is it going to come from small towns? Is it going to come from metro and tier ones? And our research suggests a large part of the growth is actually going to come from the small towns and the rural, which is there. Even if one looks at what we are calling as the mature e-commerce index market, 50% of the top 50 e-commerce index mature markets are already beyond the tier 1 cities. And this is an index that we have developed, which essentially covers transactions, ticket size, and categories. And we've created this composite index, which gives a sense of the maturity of different states and cities. And you see those red dots and green dots indicating the mix between the tier 1 and the non-tier 1. So what is driving this? Interestingly, while discounts are thought to be the common reason for doing that, it is important. However, you actually find convenience, availability also driving a lot of it. Now, the factors are different depending on the tier of the city or looking at the income level. So, for example, in tier 3 cities, you find that availability is actually as big a driver as discount. While if you look at from a perspective of income, the lower income sections, it is driven more by discounts compared to the affluent, which intuitively makes sense. The question which is there is around, does consumer actually exhibit loyalty or not? And what we have found that there is fairly high platform loyalty across cohorts. Our research indicated that close to 80% shoppers shop from 1 or 2 platforms only. Right? So what you see on this page is number of platforms that people look at. So each color is it 1, 2, 3, or 4? And 80% of shoppers shop from 1 or 2 platforms only, and the number doesn't really change whether you cut it by tier of city or income or age demographics. As people buy more, they start going to more categories and more platforms. Interestingly, it doesn't make that much of a difference if you are a new online shopper or an old online shopper. in terms of number of categories. And on the right hand side of this page, you see what's happening within category. There is a slight difference across fashion and food, which is there compared to others. And finally, we talked about the differences that we find across different cities. We actually looked at whether there is a difference within a city as well. And you see this as a map of Mumbai, and you found that here, uh, even across different parts of the same city, whether it's in terms of amount per transaction, you find that Mumbai is actually high on transactions and category, but low in terms of amount per transactions, while Parel buys high number of categories but has low amount per transaction and number of transactions. So, difference at different levels is what you see. Um, if I had to end, the one thing I would like to highlight is I started off by saying commerce being driven by content, by consumption, by confidence and credit. Easy availability of credit has been a key driver of driving this e-commerce as well. There are the other C's in terms of connectivity and capital, which allows the e-commerce players to uh, be ahead of the curve in terms of providing convenience and in terms of providing discounts, etc., which is also something which we'll see how it pans out in the years going forward. I know I'm at the close to the scheduled time. It's been a pleasure talking to you all, and happy to take any questions in case there are any.